Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the first of the two book presentations by Olivia. Burton.
Bonjour. I'm the only French of the speakers, so I would like to apologize first for my acrobatic English. It's a great pleasure to be here and to present a book that I wrote. I didn't draw it. Maigret did the drawings. And of course this book is connected with the man of the day, Richard Francis Burton. It's called Un Anglais dans mon arbre in French, and hopefully one day it will be translated in English. I don't know what the title could be, An Englishman in My Tree. I don't know if it makes sense.
It's an excellent title.
And if I'm happy to be here, it's because actually it's the third time I'm attending a conference organized by Mick and Ricardo. The first time was 4 years ago. I was there as an observer. I was just in the beginning of the process of the book writing. The second time was 2 years ago. I was just back from a big trip in Africa, connected with the book work, and I tried to explain what my goal was, and I could see in the people's eyes a little doubt about this project. And I came here to prove you that it was not a joke. So we finally went through the process. And so it all started actually in 2015 with a previous book. It was just our first book actually, which is called, that's been translated into English, Algeria is beautiful like America, Algérie c'est beau comme l'Amérique in French. And it was also a travel novel, as well as a family inquiry. I did a trip in Algeria on the footsteps of my family, who are called pieds noirs in French, like black feet. Maybe you've heard about that. They were the French people who were part of the French colonization in Algeria, and I went there to question a little bit this heritage and the complex relationships between France and Algeria. After that, since I really had the great pleasure to do this first book, I was looking for a second story. Since I have no imagination, after my mother, I thought I should deal with my father. And my name is Olivia Burton. Nobody's perfect. And suddenly I just remembered that one of the last times I saw my father, who by the way was a quite deficient, does it make sense? Deficient father? Yeah. Absent father, who left home when I was 3 and whom I had seen only every 5 years. Anyway, last time I had seen him, a friend of mine, as a joke, had offered me Found Brody's biography of Richard Burton. And I just loved the book, and I looked at some pictures in the book, and I thought, my God, there's something really looking like, between Richard Burton and my father. And I thought that maybe I had the beginning of a good novel. So maybe I can tell you a little bit of the process. It's not so easy to explain because it's based on autobiography, but then there's a part of game, obviously. So the first part of the work I did by myself before the illustrator started to work. I obviously made a lot of readings, biographies of Richard Burton, but also of his colleagues, Livingstone, Stanley, Speke, and everything. I wanted to know a bit more about this period. I read about Great Britain at that time, etc., etc. I tried, because it's in English, and it's 19th century English, and it's not so easy for me, but I think I improved a little bit my English. I tried to read some of Burton's texts. They are not all fascinating, I think we can say. Some of them are pretty boring for me, but the whole work, of course, is totally fascinating. And then I thought that I should go to various places with which he was connected. So I went to Oxford, to Trinity College, to the archive department. I won't show you anything because it didn't end in the book. I went to London obviously, to places that you all know, National Portrait Gallery, where I faced the portrait. I went to Mortlake Cemetery to see Burton's tomb. I went to Orleans House, where I met Chris Burton, and where he showed me a certain amount of objects that belonged to Richard. I went to the Royal Anthropological Society. And I went to Trieste a first time, so in 2015, and there I met a bunch of crazy, passionate people doing strange things under the rain and the wind. And then I thought that I couldn't remain on a purely European perspective. I had to go to one of the places outside of Europe where Burton had been, and I chose Africa. Of course, I chose the region where he tried to seek for the Nile sources. And I had this crazy idea to do again the trip that he had done, except that it took him 2 years. It took me 6 weeks because I didn't want to mime, the old time. So I went by plane, I got on the train, I had a cell phone, etc., etc. And I thought that little by little it would be interesting to tell the story that would mix the two stories. My inquiry, a very common plane, the contrary of an adventurer, I can tell you, French, really nothing special woman, and this great man. So I landed in Zanzibar, and this is the Café Livingstone, because after a few days, my first surprise and disappointment was to see that nobody remembered about Burton. You have to know that. And everything is centered around Livingstone. Livingstone is the big star. So I was there, I'm the descendant of Richard Francis Burton. Richard who? So this is the Café Livingstone. So finally, after days of seeking around Zanzibar, I found this little plaque. Then I went to Dar es Salaam, and I started to cross the country by train, and in this kind of countryside where he had a lot of troubles, as you may have read. So that was my trip, and that was finally the Tanganyika Lake. I must tell you, I cried when I saw the Tanganyika Lake, because I had read what he had written, and I mean it was very easy. I was on the train and I arrived, so nothing special, but I had the impression that I had done something extraordinary, and it's very beautiful. Can you see? Yeah. And then I did a lot of road, buses, and train, and buses again, to go to Victoria Lake, precisely the lake that he never saw. I had my just before leaving for Africa, doing some researches, I was totally surprised to discover that very recently, in 2006, there was a new expedition led by crazy Anglo-Saxon people seeking for the Nile source. And actually they found the furthest Nile source in Rwanda. I decided to go to see this source in Rwanda, so that's the Victoria Lake, with this kind of, touristy, pseudo-adventurer lodge. I stayed there. And then I took the road to Rwanda, to Nyungwe forest, and finally I found the Nile. Oh. And I came back home after all that, so it lasted for 2 years, because obviously I'm doing something else in my life. I thought that I had the elements and the potential for a novel, because of course there was the extraordinary life of this guy. But there was also questions about filiations, because my father, so the last time we met, told me, because I didn't tell you that I had read this book, which was a present, and I was fascinated by the looking like between him and Burton, and I asked him, look, is there a connection between our family and Richard Francis Burton? He stopped for a few seconds, and then he looked straight in my eyes and said, yes, he's your ancestor. And so I thought it was an interesting starting point to play a little bit with these questions of where do we come from, does blood count, is it education, is it phantasm, what can you do with this familial romance or novels. And so we started working with the illustrator who couldn't be here. I'm sorry about that, because obviously he did a tremendous job. And we went forward chapter after chapter, and so it gives that. I'm not going to show you the whole book, obviously, but just a few principles. We were full of doubts. We had two things that we were sure of. We wanted to do the contrary of what is usually done in graphic novels when you treat of past and present. So we decided that the past would be in color, and the present would be in kind of gray colors, because it was not just like that to be interesting, but for us it made sense in the sense that his life, Burton's life, is so extraordinary, so it needed colors, and my life in Paris, in France nowadays, well, I think grey is okay. And so that was something we were sure of. The second thing we were not sure of, but that was a goal, was to intertwine the two stories, some episodes of his life, and my quest. So you can see here Olivia, who is younger than me and nicer, on the train, on the Eurostar, to go to London. She arrives and she reads books about Burton, and then we just dive into Burton's childhood. And then that's the end of the trip by train, and we arrive in St. Pancras station. Then she goes to the National Portrait Gallery, that we reorganized a little bit for the purpose, obviously, of the script. And so she faces the portrait. And the second thing we were sure of, and it was a big challenge, is that we wanted Burton to become a lively character, because it's a graphic novel, it's not an essay. So we had this idea of, following what happened really for me. At the beginning, Burton was an image for me. He was on the cover of books, he was a portrait. And after 2 years, when you read and you go to 3 years, he became a kind of obsession. So when we go forward, that's Orleans House, where I could see all the objects, and just to show you the balance between reality and the book. And I chose to treat a certain number of episodes of his life, like India. So he's here arriving in India. That's Smoke Lake again. That's the way we dive into the Lamech episode. And little by little, he becomes a character, a real character, and he becomes a ghost partner of the young lady who follows her. So they have discussions, they get angry, so that is Olivia's arrival in Trieste, where you can see a conference here taking place. With different people talking, and so this never happened where I was doing a talk in your conference, and knowing nothing, and and so Burton is at the end of the room helping her to give the answers. And that's the end of the conference at the restaurant with a lot of wine and jokes. And then a nightly promenade in Trieste. This is something I stole from a Fellini movie, Amarcord. That was a personal tribute to my guest. And here we are in Zanzibar, so maybe you can recognize the Livingstone Cafe that I showed you before. And you can see Burton here. I can make a little translation. He says, le Burton Café serait plus d'allure. The Burton Café would be more elegant rather than Livingstone Café. And, excuse me. So that was an interesting treatment, I think, of the idea that during her traveling, she's obsessed by Burton's travels that she had read. Can you see correctly? Yeah. So that's the train. So here again we are in grey and I don't know how you call this color, but whatever. And Burton is here, doing some commentaries. So that's a past episode. So when he crosses the land to go to Tanganyika Lake, so with a lot of problems on the way. They arrive, and that's the end of the trip. He is with her in Nyungwe Forest in Rwanda. So finally, she has succeeded to take him to his goal, the Nile sources. They arrive, and they are told by the rangers that actually this source in Rwanda is one of the sources, the further source, but there is another one in Burundi, which is the higher source. There's another one in Uganda with the more abundant source. So finally, it's not the end of the book, but it's the end of the quest. They have found the source of the Nile, but they have discovered that the quest for the origin and the source is endless, and that might be the beauty of it. Thank you.